Each homicide case is tragic, and that's why every law enforcement officer is so determined in their investigations. Every little detail that may be used to decipher the mystery must be considered, or else a criminal may get away with the crime. Sometimes the oddest evidence is found by police. It's likely that criminals that are caught due to such strange evidence never even saw it coming. Today, that's why we'll be looking at 5 strange clues that caught killers. Number 5. A Facebook selfie led to the conviction of a 21-year-old woman who took her friend's life in 2015. Cheyenne Rose Antoine was identified as a suspect based on a selfie in which she posed beside her 18-year-old victim, Brittany Gargole. Brittany's body was discovered near a landfill on the outskirts of Saskatoon 2 years ago. The photo, uploaded on March 24th, showed the pair standing side by side with the caption reading, "Out and about with my girl, so beautiful." Just hours after that photo was taken, Antoine and Gargole attended a house party and then got into a heated argument while they were under the influence of alcohol. Cheyenne initially denied having any knowledge of what happened to Brittany. She claimed that on the night of Brittany's death, the two of them went out to several bars and got into an argument. Cheyenne then told police that she and Brittany parted ways that night after Brittany left the bar with an unidentified man. Later that night, Cheyenne posted, "Where are you? Haven't heard from you. Hope you made it home safe," on Brittany's Facebook wall. Prosecutors will later claim that Cheyenne posted that to throw off investigators. 2 years into the investigation, police were finally able to link Cheyenne to the crime after using Facebook posts to create a timeline of events from the night of Brittany's death. It was then that investigators came across an image in which Cheyenne was wearing a belt that was identical to a belt found by Brittany's body. Cheyenne eventually accepted responsibility for Brittany's death, although she said she had no memory of the event. However, a friend of Cheyenne's told police that Cheyenne had admitted she took Brittany's life. She showed up at the friend's house and hysterically confessed to how she had hurt her friend. Cheyenne was originally facing second-degree crime charges, but she eventually accepted a plea deal. She was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Number 4. Dennis Rader nearly got away. Known as the BTK, Dennis Rader has taken the lives of 10 people in Wichita, Kansas from 1974 to 1991. As he was committed of these crimes, he would often leave clues to taunt authorities. Dennis was born in 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and he'd been living a double life. He seemed to be a devoted husband and company man on the surface, but at the same time, he was doing terrible things in Wichita. Rader's alter ego surfaced in 2004, but his tendency to leave clues led to his arrest and imprisonment the following year. He committed his first crime on January 15, 1974, when he took the lives of 4 members of the Otero family in their Wichita home. He then left with a watch and a radio, souvenirs that he usually took from victims. In April of '74, Rader targeted a 21-year-old woman. Later that year, he wrote a letter detailing the January homicides and left it as a note in a book at the Wichita Public Library. It was eventually recovered by the police. Despite his cat-and-mouse game with authorities, Rader was able to keep the lid on his secret assassin life. Reportedly an attentive husband, he and his wife had a son in 1975 and a daughter in '78. Over the next several years, BTK dropped off the map as Rader focused on work and family life. With many news stories marking the 30th anniversary of the Otero case, BTK resurfaced in 2004. Rader sent local media outlets and authorities several letters filled with items related to his crimes, including pictures, a word puzzle, and an outline for the BTK story. He also left packages with clues, including a computer disk that ultimately led authorities to Rader's church. Rader was arrested on February 25, 2005, and charged for all of his crimes. His neighbors and fellow church members were stunned by the news, unable to believe that the man they knew was a serial criminal that had haunted the area for so long. Rader pleaded guilty to all charges on June 27, 2005. He was sent to El Dorado Correctional Facility to serve his 10 life sentences. Number 3. Scottish serial criminal Dennis Nilsson is believed to have taken the lives of at least 12 young men between 1978 and 1983 in North London. He committed the homicides at 2 North London addresses in Cricklewood and Muswell Hill and became known as the Muswell Hill culprit. In February of 1983, Nilsson was arrested by police, but the discovery of his crimes was not the result of any sort of police investigation or tip-off. Instead, Nilsson's arrest was doing his own thing, whether it was intentional or not. At his home in Melrose Avenue, Nilsson would lure his victims into the property and he would take their lives. He would then have to get rid of the evidence, which he would do by burying it in his backyard. He would burn a tire at the same time, so as to conceal what he was trying to get rid of. When Nilsson moved to another property in Muswell Hill, known as Cranley Gardens, he moved into an attic flat with no garden space. As a result, he had no way to get rid of the evidence tying him to the crimes, so between 1982 and 1983, he would just flush the evidence down the toilet. On February 4th, 1983, Nilsson, alongside other tenants, complained to the estate agents of Cranley Gardens of drain and sewer blockages. Responding to the complaints, a plumber for Dino Rod, an emergency plumbing company, visited Cranley Gardens. When he opened the drain at the side of the property, he discovered it was blocked with what appeared to be human remains. He returned the following day at 7:30 a.m. with his supervisor, Gary Wheeler, in order to inspect the drain, but when they arrived, the drain had been cleared. Continuing their work, the two found more human remains inside a pipe leading from the drain belonging to Nilsson's flat. They were taken to the mortuary at Hornsey for examination. Nilsson then confessed that there were other human remains in his flat and even named some of his victims. He also told police that he'd carried out other crimes at his former address on Melrose Avenue and showed them 3 locations in the garden where he tried to hide away his crimes. On November 4th, 1983, Nilsson was sentenced to life in prison. He passed away in prison on May 12, 2018, when he was 72 years old. Number 2. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer is perhaps the most famous cold case of all time. After unfolding the plot twists, ignoring warning signs, and blatant oblivion, the police were finally able to crack the case. Dahmer was eventually arrested, but not until 1991, 13 years after he took the life of his first victim. Police caught him when they spotted Dahmer's final victim, Tracy Edwards, sprinting down a street in downtown Milwaukee with handcuffs on. The police then escorted the man back to the place he was escaping, Dahmer's apartment. Dahmer told police that a lover's quarrel was the reason for the man's weird behavior. The police were extremely gullible at the time and believed his story, so they laid the matter to rest for the time being until the disturbing photos of people's remains were spotted by an officer in his apartment. He was arrested that day. Dahmer took advantage of the lives of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Many of the victims were not known to be missing by their families. Sadly, quite a few of them were disowned or tossed aside by their own families. He was indeed being careful in selecting his victims. He chose people who were often borderline criminals, making their disappearances less noticeable and reducing the likelihood of his capture. By May of 1992, Dahmer had been sentenced to 16 consecutive life sentences in prison. Interestingly, in his trial, it was revealed that he found inspiration from the antagonists in the movies The Exorcist III and The Last Jedi, and that he would watch scenes from these movies before he picked his victims. Just 2 years after his sentencing, his fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver at the Columbia Correctional Institute, took his life. The inmate, who was angered by the list of crimes that Jeffrey had committed, later told a guard that God told him to end Jeffrey's life. Number 1. Harold Shipman was a British doctor and serial culprit who took the lives of at least 215 of his patients. His crimes raised troubling questions about the powers and responsibilities of the medical community in Britain. People started to have doubts about the adequacy of the procedures for certifying sudden death. Shipman was born into a working-class family in Manchester. He became interested in medicine as he watched his mother receive morphine injections to ease the pain she suffered from while dying of lung cancer. In 1970, he received a medical degree from Leeds University, and a few years later, he became a general practitioner. The average age of Shipman's victims was 76 years old. It seemed that he targeted the elderly victims because he knew his crimes would more likely go unnoticed. Some nurses voiced their suspicion but never raised concerns. A local undertaker also noticed that Dr. Shipman's patients seemed to be dying at an unusually high rate. They exhibited similar poses in death. Most of his deceased patients were fully clothed and usually sitting up or reclining. He was concerned enough to approach Shipman about this directly, who reassured him that there was nothing to be concerned about. Later, another medical colleague, Dr. Susan Booth, also found the similarity disturbing, and the local coroner's office was alerted. Shipman's crimes were finally uncovered after he forged the will of one of his victims, Kathleen Grundy, leaving him everything, including a $386,000 inheritance. Cops grew suspicious when a pattern emerged between Shipman's home visits and the deaths of his patients. Shipman was also left as the beneficiary in the will of his final victim, Kathleen Grundy, who died on June 24, 1998. She was also fit and active for an 81-year-old, with no serious health issues, and her death was entirely unexpected. Suspicious cops tested her corpse to reveal that she'd passed away from a diamorphine overdose. Her body was re-examined on August 1, 1998, and morphine was found in her muscle tissue. In 2000, Shipman was convicted on 15 counts of homicides and 1 count of forgery and sentenced to life in prison. Shipman took his own life in his cell while in the prison. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.